welcome to the Fungi Monkey podcast. This is number 5 of these podcasts, and I intend to go on much more and record more. There's been a bit of a break because I've come to Chile for the first time to meet my son, which has been a wonderful experience. And now I'm here. They wouldn't let me in for 5 months because of COVID. So now I'm here. I'm very happy, and today I'm going to be joined by someone. I am joined by someone, Paul Cardin. He's a really patient fella because we've actually already done one of these podcasts, but due to technical problems at my end, it didn't quite work out. But this is a story that must be heard. This is a man that must be listened to. This is a really interesting. He's released a really interesting book, Return to Bomb Alley, 1982, The Falklands Deception. And I want to introduce you now. So, Paul, tell us a bit about yourself in your own words.
Okay, Johnny. As you can see, it's taken me a long time to eventually write this book. It's taken 40 years. So the thought of doing a book first occurred to me probably a couple of years after the event. So in about the mid-80s, I thought, I'd love to get my thoughts down on paper, and because I always had sort of questions in my mind after I came back from the Falklands. I wasn't happy with the way the whole thing had been conducted, and the longer time has gone on, the more sort of the deeper the questions have become, and I thought I'm going to have to get my story out there. So that's what I've done. I've put a book. I've got a book out there.
How does it feel to become an author then? To go from, because I know we've talked about this. I'm going to let everybody else into the world of you, because you in between that you've done a lot of other things.
Yep.
And was there a time where you thought, well, obviously I'm not going to tell no story now because I'm just doing normal life, I'm just doing the normal stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, every sort of 10-year anniversary, so in 1992 and 2002 and 2012, it was in the media. Every 10 years, it was given a lot of attention, so I was picking up on that. And every time that happened, I thought, I've got to do something, And eventually I have, and it's got to the stage where I thought, I better do it while I'm still here,
Yeah.
Because time goes on very quickly. So, sorry, what was your question then, Johnny?
Well, really, the question is did you think that you were going to be able to tell this story? And obviously, you've had the like you say, the spark of 10-year anniversaries, etc. That's something that always baffles me. Why people only wait till the anniversary to look back on something? It's like almost like you can ignore all of the pain for 10 years, and every 10 years you just got to take it in for a bit to make everybody accept it. But I mean, it's really it doesn't seem like as people have woken up to the tomfoolery of people in governments, to nation states, to intelligence services, etc. I think people have become more likely to tell all of their stories now. They feel a lot less afraid. Was there any time where there was like a bit of fear about, was it like for the first 10, 20 years, were you thinking maybe I should, but what if I do, and etc.?
Yeah, I did think about that because I did sign the Official Secrets Act. Every forces member does sign the Official Secrets Act. So that
How long does that last for?
Well, it lasts for your whole life.
Oh, well,
but
you're in trouble then, sunshine.
Not really, because the more time that goes on, it's been sort of modified as time has gone on. And if I was telling this story in 1985, so, and I released this book in 1985, I could possibly land myself in hot water. But with it being now 40 years ago, there's been cases against people as time has gone on, and the law has been changed so that as time goes on, it's easier to speak now. They're less likely to come after you. And after 40 years, I don't think they're going to come after me. I doubt it.
Yeah, from someone who I study intelligence agencies through the years, and something happened in the mid 90s and late 90s, where they realized the technology was, I think, too advanced to hide anything anymore. And so they had to find new mechanisms, new ways to distance themselves from the problems that they would cause. And that meant a lot of the older problems, things like Falklands, etc., and other things we'll talk about, were able to be seen as, oh, well, we'll let those stories be told now. They're far enough away in history.
Yeah, yeah. I think. Do you know what I think? I think the intelligence services are likely to be 10 years ahead of us in the technology they use anyway, just to give that bit of separation, to give themselves an advantage. You know, it sounds a bit conspiratorial, but
I think they want it to sound conspiratorial. I mean, the fact is that a lot of this technology that we're seeing now is already was already being used 10 years ago. They have to build infrastructure for it, though, and so they usually build temporary infrastructure. I'm down here in south of the equator. I'm down in Chile at the moment, and hopefully be here for a while. And I'm next door to Argentina. I mean, a lot of people who are going to be listening to this are probably going to be from an American or global audience that maybe missed the Falklands growing up because they wouldn't have seen the anniversaries necessarily. So can you give people an idea of where the Falklands are, or the Malvinas, I think they're called, down here? So can you give a sort of like a basic understanding of where this whole theatre of war was happening?
Okay. Well, the Falkland Islands themselves are 400 miles off the coast of Argentina, which itself is down, the bottom end of Argentina is down at the southern end of the continent of South America, very near to Cape Horn. It's a huge country, and it extends a long way up. And I don't know how it's a lot bigger much bigger than the UK. You know.
Yeah. Well, I know that Chile is around 3,000 kilometers or 3,600 kilometers long, and Argentina is a little bit less in length than that, I think. So it is very long. Yeah.
Yeah, but with regard to on a sort of global scale, or with respect to the UK, it's actually 7,900 and something, so 8,000 miles away from the UK.
So it seems a little bit, I mean, for a lot of people, they would say, okay, so you've got this little island in the middle of nowhere, really, with the only neighbors being Argentina. Why were the British there in the first place? Why is this called the Falkland Islands?
Well, do you know what I think we're going back to 18 something when I didn't really research this subject for the book, but I think it was the early 19th century when the British landed there. I mean, somebody could correct me on that, but I think we were there then. I think it changed hands a couple of times, possibly before that. And then in 1982, obviously, there was the invasion. And to be totally honest, the population of the UK, I'd say 99.9% of them didn't know where the Falkland Islands were. I think a larger amount probably had heard of them, but still didn't know where they were, you know. So to us on our ship, and I think on every ship, everyone was quite startled to hear that there'd been an invasion, and when they heard where the islands were, that was a bit of a shock, really, because it was so far away, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't make it. I mean, it doesn't make. It's going to make less sense to people who don't understand colonialism. And the ownership of islands as well. I mean, this is something that Britain has done really well over the years, along with America and other countries, is taking those island nations and using them as things like tax havens and things that they can use offshore and be detached from their main country. And that is something that is partially to do with that, because on the run up to the Falklands War, there was a kind of detaching of Britishness from the islands, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. And if we set it into the history, really, from the Second World War, as we all know, lots of former colonial countries were gaining their independence. The Falklands was a bit different because the islanders, there were 1,800 of them at the time in 1982. They were always very pro-British, so it seemed to be unlikely that they would ever want to have independence. They did want to be to carry on being connected to the sort of motherland, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say there was a detachment, there was. I mean, if I give you a bit of background, Mrs. Thatcher was elected in 1979, in May 1979.
Sorry.
And I can remember it quite clearly. I was only sort of, what was I, 18 or 19 then? And I remember that a lot of women voters were very excited about the thought of having a female prime minister for the first time. So I think that gave Mrs. Thatcher a big boost, you know, and managed to get her over the finishing line, you know, because she didn't have a big majority, about 30 seats, I think. Wasn't the biggest majority ever. But she got in, and she got in on a high, you know, she was quite popular at the start. And then in 1980, we had the Iranian embassy siege. I don't know if you remember that. That was it lasted about 6 days, and it was in April, May 1980, down in London.
There's been many a serialization and documentaries made of those. I mean, they've really every time that you see one of those, you've got all the SAS, these supposedly secret service guys.
I actually know one of the guys, Rusty Fairman. He's a friend of mine, and he lives just close to me in New Brighton. You know.
I mean, does he? What was his opinion on that siege? Does he think it was all it looked like it was?
You know what? I haven't really talked to him about that in detail, but he's a very clever guy, and he's his own man. You know, so if you ask him a question about that, he'll give you a very honest answer. And you know, I think I'd suggest now you should get him on your show.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I will.
Yeah,
that'd be good, because you come from a place though where it's very real compared to what London is, because when we're talking about Margaret Thatcher and we're talking about Parliament and these guys that live down in the southeast of England, a lot of people don't realize that Britain in general is such a mixed place. And of course you're up by a more closer working class place, aren't you, up near Liverpool?
we are Merseyside. Yeah, there's a big Irish contingency. There's a big influx of Irish people after the famine, sort of thing. So and on Merseyside generally, we're more sort of down to earth, and we are working class, and conservative politicians are not popular people around here, not at all. You know, it's always been a Labour heartland.
Yeah. Is there a belief that you know, that still the army and the navy and stuff like that and the air force are really important in that area? Do you feel that it's different to when you were younger? Because obviously you joined the navy, you decided, I come from this, and I wanna serve my country. It's really a weird situation back then to explain to people, the 70s and the 80s especially, where people who like trying to explain to people why working class people who felt completely separate from this London elite would do their bidding, in a sense. So
yeah, well, it's the MOD, the Ministry of Defence, you know, the Royal Navy, the Army, the Air Force. They're very clever when it comes to advertising who they are, and for recruits, you know, they're very, very clever. They make it look exciting. They make it look like you're going to travel, which you do. There's no denying that. And I think that's what tempts people in, particularly if they come from working class areas where there's a lot of unemployment. You know, they think, oh, God, I've got to do something with my life. You know, they end up, they don't necessarily join to serve Queen and country. They join to travel, or they join because they think there's going to be a bit of action or whatever. That sort of.
Do you know? I mean, it rings true for me. When I was 10, 11 years old, around that age. I'm coming from South Wales. It's working class, being completely and utterly attacked by the Thatcher government. The mines all closed just north of where I lived. My dad was a steel worker. His job was under threat. He marched next to the socialist leader Arthur Scargill back in the day, and he was always out with all the rest of the people in our city were defending the working class, etc. But when I reached about 10, 11, there was so little opportunities in Cardiff. I remember me and my friend, a guy called Steve Gauci. I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning his name, but I haven't seen him since about when I was 11. We went to different high schools, and we went to the local barracks, and we went to Maindy Barracks in Cardiff, and we had decided we were best friends. We wore the same coats, we had the same clothes, like we were that type of best friends, stomping around the place like, yeah, we're going to do everything together for the rest of our lives. And we went to Maindy Barracks, and I discovered that I would have to own a pair of boots. And my parents would never afford to be able at that point to actually. Even my dad was on a good wage, but I think he was, cheating around and doing naughty stuff. So he was spending all his money elsewhere.
Yeah,
And as soon as I found out that I needed to buy a pair of boots, it's like, oh well, the army's out of the question for me. And Steve was like, yeah, same for me. So we didn't become cadets. That was what the plan was. Let's go. Let's learn how to fire guns and do all of these things. They had advertised that to us. So I really can understand that. So by this time, you got what, 1982, and you're sailing where?
I was on HMS Yarmouth, which was an anti-submarine frigate, and was about the same age as me. So, it was commissioned in about 1960, and I was on that ship, about 240 of us, I think, on that ship. And we were actually on our way to the Far East on a deployment. And this was we were going to go to Singapore and Malaysia and lots of other wonderful places. And all of us were really fired up about that. We've really been looking forward to that. And that was sort of March, April 1982, when we were just sailing across the Med. And I was in front of, I was a leading radio operator. So I was a communicator. And I'd see all the messages that came in over the wires, over the waves from the headquarters in London, CNC Fleet. And a flash message came in. And I saw it coming. I was the first one to know on our ship that we were not going on this deployment. Because when this message came in, it basically said, turn around, go back to Gibraltar, refuel, rearm, take stores on. Then after that, go and join the HMS Hermes battle group in the Atlantic, and then sail down to Ascension Island, and then sail down to the Falklands. So I picked that message up, ripped it off the top of the teleprinter, and I thought, what should I do with this? And part of me said, should I rip it up?
Great power. Great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Did you crap yourself a little bit though?
No, not really. It hadn't sunken in at that time. We'd all been briefed in Gibraltar previously that the islands had been invaded by Galtieri. Well, we didn't think it was really going anywhere. We thought this would be sorted out with peace proposals, whatever. Then you'd all bugger off back to Argentina. At that point, there was no reason for crapping yourself. The crapping yourself came later. We'll come on to that later.
Yeah.
We got back to Gibraltar, and then it kind of sunk in for a lot of us that this could be the real deal here, because they started issuing us with dog tags, which is basically a piece of string with a little medal on with your name, your number, and I think blood type, stuff like that. That was there for a reason, because if you ended up dead, that would be there to identify you. And people started thinking, wow, I wonder where this is going to go. So
they were a punk's fashion statement when I was young as well. I used to wear a set of dog tags just to be a punk. That's it's amazing how that works. That must be extremely interesting. So you turned around, you went back to Gibraltar. I think the ship didn't stay in Gibraltar long, did it?
We were there for 3 or 4 days, and then I think we joined up with HMS Broadsword, and then sailed out into the Atlantic and met up with the Hermes group as planned. And then we started sailing down very, very slowly at first, because at that time, Alexander Haig, who was the American Secretary of State at the time, he became the sort of go-between the two countries, Britain and Argentina. So he was trying to broker a peace deal, and I was in charge of what was called the Starboard Watch radio team in the main communications office, and we'd be monitoring. We'd have the World Service on, the BBC World Service. Very often.
I'm hearing the truth.
We get more news from back then. We get more accurate news from the BBC World Service than we would from the equipment around us in the radio room.
Yeah.
But not all the time. Thinking back, there were certain things they said that were a bit questionable, you know. But anyway, we were monitoring these peace deals as they came and went, as we sailed further south. And the further we got south, the less likely it looked that there was going to be a successful, peaceful outcome.
Yeah, I got to warn everybody here. If you can hear a mixture between ghost noises and babies crying in the background, is because Chilean houses are made of wood, and there's 2 women with babies in the next room. So that is from my house, my head, not Paul's. So where did you go after Gibraltar then? When you met up with the group and you started the battle group, I suppose, is it called a battle group?
Yeah, it was called the battle group. Well, it was called the task force. That was a sort of official name. It became known as the task force, and the name of the operation was Operation Corporate, and the guy in charge of that was Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward, and he was based on HMS Hermes. So he was the guy in overall charge of what went on in the South Atlantic on the UK side, and then the guy in charge of the whole operation was Admiral Fieldhouse, who was based in Northwood, which is a base in just north of London. So that's C&C Fleet, or Commander-in-Chief Fleet. That was Admiral Fieldhouse. But do you know what, Johnny? I think we need to go back to Mrs. Thatcher again, because as far as I'm concerned, the whole premise for the conflict was questionable from the start. And if we look at the way Mrs. Thatcher and her ministers behaved at the time, it's all come out now. It all came out in 2012. When I say it all came out, not everything has come out, because a lot of things, they've actually banged another 40 years on top. So a lot of it we'll find out until I'm 92 in the year 2052. That's when we'll discover everything. We may not even discover it then, but that's what we're told at the moment. But can I just jump back, Johnny, and tell you about some of what went on just after the Iranian embassy siege, when Mrs. Thatcher was on a high. Could only go down from that point, and she certainly did go down, because she had economic policies which were called monetarist, and they were very unforgiving policies for working class people like me and you. And very quickly we had 3 million people unemployed in the UK and rising. And we also had the inflation rate was double what it is today. It was 18% back then, so it was rocketing inflation. And there was unrest in the party and in the Conservative Party. Come the invasion, there were about 60 Tory MPs, so this was double her majority, who were unhappy with Mrs. Thatcher and wanted a new face, you know. So she had all the pressure building on her. And come the end of 1981, she had an approval rating of just 23%, which is the lowest approval rating on record for any UK Prime Minister. And that includes David Cameron during Brexit. He was really rock bottom, but he didn't sink quite as low as Mrs. Thatcher did in 1980.
Well, the lady's not for turning, but she's certainly for bursting into flames and falling downwards, isn't she?
Yeah. And something else I forgot to say is that we had riots breaking out in 1981. I think you'll remember that.
Well, I mean, I was born 1980. So I would be
Yeah,
one here, but
yeah,
what my memory is looking. I mean, we have you know you don't get shown TV programs of the time and remember them at that age, but those pictures of the early 80s of when I was born, when I
yeah.
see them around, it's always the working class being beaten up by police
Yeah,
on horseback and
yeah.
some terrible pictures, of course, of the mining communities being just attacked. These were working class people who were attacked by what was an elite that didn't believe in society. So, I mean, it's fantastic to go back and see what that era looked like because it just looks
Yeah.
dystopian.
And it was like that in 1981. Between April and July in 1981, we had riots breaking out, like I say, in every major city in the UK, in London, in Birmingham, in Manchester, and in Liverpool, and in other places. There was a lot of unrest, you know. But Mrs. Thatcher, like you say, wasn't for turning. She carried on with those economic policies, and she even increased taxes as well on top of that. And lots of economic experts were in uproar over that because they said, look, if you increase taxes, it's going to immediately impact the industrial base, the manufacturing base in the UK. And sure enough, every places started closing, steelworks, mines, they all started closing very quickly. And she carried on with that. And then we had the miners' strike in 1984, and the rest
Mhm.
of the mines went after that. But
Yeah.
she was sort of setting, she was laying down her plans in the very early 80s, and she stuck to them. She
Yeah.
was not pretending, she stuck to them.
But
And
do you get a feeling a lot of that was policies that we wouldn't? I mean, like you say, the technology is already 10 years ahead, but so are the policies in many respects. So now we see a lot of what we see now is to prepare us for this technological fourth industrial revolution. So where we think it's for COVID or for this or for that, and we're told other things, in
yeah,
actual fact, these policies are being carefully interwoven into our society and so that they can pull that rug from under us, that
yeah.
comfortable rug that we're used to from under us.
We're putting up a fight. I think we're putting up a really good fight on this one, what's happening now.
Hmm.
And I don't think they have been able to roll out everything that they want to.
Yeah,
No, I think
I think they were.
they've got
They seem. Yeah, they seem very. I don't think they could ever have. uh, I'm not sure. They people are too intelligent to go back to that thing where it'll just be riots breaking out. Because the
yeah,
other thing that I notice, if you go back to the late 70s and the early 80s, the time of Thatcher's peak, if you go back to those days and you see the people talking when they're asked questions on the street, most people don't have a clue about the basics of politics and how it works. Now everybody's very clued up.
yeah,
They can't, it won't be riots the same. So you see the
yeah,
crackdowns in Canada happened. They started getting authoritarian. They brought in riot police from all around the world. It was everything from every sort of authoritarian country sent support to Canada
yeah,
to stand against families who were
yeah,
saying, we're not going to riot, we're not going to cause trouble, we're going to have barbecues, we're going to have fun, we're going to enjoy ourselves, and we're going to say this is a society we want to create, and that's the society you want to create. So no longer can they create that PR. They're not in control of the PR machine anymore. As well as that downfall of the press. When you're talking about you'll get most of the information from BBC World News. I don't think there'd be anywhere else you could go for the information back then. You'd have to go. You were
yeah.
forced funneled into that.
We did have
Now
a
it's
we did have a
loads.
choice, actually, Johnny. We did have a choice. We had Voice of America as well.
Yeah. Well,
Not
goody.
really a choice, but there you go.
Yeah, well, and I said this last time we spoke is that thing of Reagan and Thatcher were very mirror image of each
Yeah,
other in a lot of their policies. As we get towards closer to a globalist ideal, we're more likely to see that happen. And I think ever since the World War II, we've been approaching that. So that's why we've seen that symmetry happen. So you were. Let's get back. Thatcher, she's not she's not a popular lady, and so the Falklands is a hoorah. This is a good thing for Thatcher, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. And I need to give you a little bit more background about what she was up to in 1980 and 1981. Now, let me think now. Let me think. There was quite a lot going on behind the scenes, and Mrs. Thatcher was fully aware that a lot of her activity would not be seen because of the 30-year rule, which we all know about. It's now become the 20-year rule, but back then it was the 30-year rule. And everything she did in 1982 or in 1981 or 1980 would not be discovered until, behind the scenes that is, would not be discovered until 30 years later, which really serves politicians, because they can do a lot of stuff behind the scenes and manipulate events, manipulate elections even.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the first thing she was doing was high-level trade talks with Galtieri back in the early 1980s. And she was doing that behind the backs of the Falkland Islanders, so they didn't get a say on that. They didn't even get to find out about it until 2012. So that was one incident where you can see that the Falkland Islands have been left on the side, left to struggle, sort of thing. And then another thing was in 1981, Mrs. Thatcher brought out what was called the British Nationality Act. And what this did was, for several overseas dependencies like the Falkland Islands, it branded them as foreigners. And it said you can no longer settle in the UK, because in the past they had been able to apply and settle in the UK if they felt like doing that. She took that away from them, snatched it away. And that's another sort of thing that I think that one was out there. We did know about that, but there was a lot of other stuff going on. There were arms deals going on between the fascist junta, and the Conservative government, and they didn't stop until 4 days before.
Isn't it extraordinary? And it's one of the things you can see their real face when you actually follow arms deals.
The future enemy.
Yeah. I tell you what, I go through history. Man, at the moment I'm on like 5 different investigations, and they're really complex, really loads of stuff happening. Some of them are slightly interwoven. One I'm looking at recently, which I don't need to go into. It really is just an amazing story, but it all came from being asked to look into just one line in a book. Just one line in a book that's coming up of links between gangsters in Britain and arms trade. And it's led me down a 3-part series investigation that goes across 10, 20 years of really strange people who are really connected to some big players, but disconnected from political, the heads of politics, etc. And nearly every single one of them are linked. And the original line is to see the arms trade and the illegal smuggling of arms, and it's amazing. You see exactly the same, all of the same people who are caught doing lots of other terrible things. Their day jobs are smuggling arms or selling illegal weapons to some junta, some regime somewhere.
It all gets a gloss of respectability, doesn't it? You know, there was actually an arms trade, an arms fair in Liverpool a few months ago, and there's absolute uproar around here because we didn't want to see that happening in our city.
Same in Cardiff. We had the same in Cardiff about 3 years ago, where there was just a spontaneous amount of people who just come out and said, no, we're not having this. You're not selling your missiles here. And they say, well, no, it's all stuff like for medical troops and medical corps, and it's all good stuff. It's good arms, not bad arms. You know, it's that idea. But I mean, of course, the whole idea is the supporting of war. And again, this is, I think, what you were saying. It's not. We're fighting back better now because of our understanding of the basics. You know, arms trade bad. That's it. we know this. So back then, 4 days before the invasion, and some of the weapons or arms that are going to be used against the Brits are still being sold to the
That's right, and we had sold some of our Type 42 destroyers to the Argentinians as well, which to me is okay, fair enough. You can do that. It's 8,000 miles away. You know, that you wouldn't think. I think that happened a lot earlier than the Falklands, you know, because the ships were actually used in the Falklands conflict.
So the actual British destroyers, British-made
Yeah,
destroyers, were used. Because
yeah.
destroyers are a class of ship that are pretty serious. They're not small ships,
Oh,
are they?
yeah, they are. But to get back to the stuff that she was doing behind the scenes, what was the next one? Yeah, there was a guy called Nicholas Ridley. He was a foreign minister in the Thatcher cabinet, and he was given a top secret mission to go and meet Argentina's deputy foreign secretary in Switzerland, in Geneva. And he toddled off there, and up for discussion was a leaseback deal of 99 years and shared sovereignty for the Falkland Islands between Argentina and the UK. And that would be a similar affair to what went on in Hong Kong, as you remember, because that ran out in 1997, and Chris Patton handed Hong Kong over with great reluctance, I think, to China. You know, but that was a deal that was trying to be set up by Nicholas Ridley, and it was all top secret. And the government, it's pathetic, really, but they put out a cover story saying that Nicholas Ridley had gone on holiday with his wife to paint watercolours by Lake Geneva, where it's very scenic. You know, you can just imagine a pair sitting there painting watercolours. You know, that was the cover story.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic for an investigator like me, because every time I see an article like that in the past, I know, what were they doing there, really? You know, it's a big flashing light to anybody who realizes it, and usually you can only see it afterwards anyway. But
this was all top secret, and it was stressed. You can actually go and see the document now that refers to this. Which is stamped secret at the top, but there's a sentence in there saying, absolutely no mention of this meeting must be made to anybody, type of thing. You know, I'm paraphrasing there, but they had to go to the Falkland Islanders and get their permission, basically, or get their opinion on this. And Nicholas Ridley did that. He travelled down there. I think it was in 1980 sometime. He traveled.
And how many people at this time live in the Falkland Islands?
1,800.
So a small amount, relatively.
It's small. Since doubled. It's about 3,000 now. But they basically gave him a good hearing, but gave him the bum's rush and sent him on his way. You know, they weren't listening to that. They wanted
that shows that they're probably very British.
They didn't want Argentine flags flying on their flag masts. You know, they didn't. It's the last thing they wanted. But anyway, that failed. But that just shows you that this was the direction of travel. You know, they wanted to get rid of these islands, and they didn't really care about them. Mrs. Thatcher, after the invasion, the first thing Mrs. Thatcher said was, the interests of the Falkland Islanders are paramount. She kept repeating that again and again and again, you know, ad nauseum. But she never said it once before the invasion. She actually acted opposite to that before the invasion.
So these were all like, I mean, just in probably our shared opinions, like signals to the Argentinian government or the Argentines that, look, we're not that interested. You can make your move. You can make your move. Do you think they would have had intelligence that the Argentines or Argentinians, you can use both apparently, do you think that they had intelligence that said that they would be in a winning position if they attacked the Falklands Islands, or at least maybe even fed to them by the British?
I really don't know, and I wouldn't want to speculate on that. I really don't know. Some people will know that. They'll know all the details of that, but you're never going to get that out of those people.
Well, not until you're 92, mate. Not until you're 92.
No, there's more though. I haven't finished, Johnny. There's more. There were defence cuts as well. to all the armed services, and in particular to the Navy. And the first Sea Lord was up in arms about this.
I love that name, the First Sea Lord. He rises from the oceans.
Like a Neptune figure with a trident.
Yeah.
He was up in arms about it, and he wanted to get a meeting with Mrs. Thatcher to discuss it, and she kept avoiding him. She wouldn't talk to him. Eventually, he got a letter to her that basically said, "Look, I've got a very good navy here. I've got one which can react at the drop of a hat if there's an incident. I can send ships there. If you go ahead with these cuts, I don't like the look of them. I'm not going to be able to react. You've got to stop it now." And she just ignored him. She carried on with the cuts. One of those cuts was the removal of a ship called Jesus, why's my head not working? It was Yeah.
HMS reluctant to come into your mind.
It was the guard ship. I just know the name of it. It's the guard ship for the Falkland Islands. A big red vessel, and it used to sail around the islands. And Lord Carrington, he wrote to Mrs. Thatcher and said, "Look, you can't get rid of that ship." She wanted to decommission it. He said, "You can't get rid of her. She's not just a defence, a piece of defence. She's also a political statement showing that we are concerned about the islands and about the interests of the islanders." And again, she wouldn't listen to him either.
Yeah.
So
it's like they were inviting it in.
1981, just towards the end of 1981, as the invasion was coming closer.
So you were sailing then down. You come from Gibraltar again. Another place where Britain has got their oar in and kept their oar in, and you stopped down by the equator before you actually moved down, didn't you?
Yeah, at Ascension Island, we stopped there. And
who owns Ascension Island?
It's the UK, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the UK, but I think America's got some involvement as well. But it's an airstrip. It's a huge airstrip on Ascension Island, and that is key. Without Ascension Island, we could never have pulled this off. Couldn't have done it. It just wouldn't have been possible.
There's not many allies down in South America for the British, is there?
No, that's the problem. Yeah. Apart from Chile, where you're sitting now, Chile was a big ally. Pinochet was
Chile is a very strange place. Pinochet was a very evil man, and if you want evil attracting evil, in Thatcher and Pinochet friendship is just emblematic of that era, really. The darkness.
You like Thatcher and Savile. I mean, Thatcher and Savile were meeting each other every New Year's Eve for 11 years.
It's insane the reach he had.
That was in Chequers, and I assume that started in 1979 because 11 years later she was out. So,
we don't know. I mean, Savile was right in with the Conservative Party.
We paid for it all. We paid for all those meetings, and I don't think Savile ever got vetted properly, because if he was vetted properly, he wouldn't have gotten near Thatcher or near royalty.
Yeah, I don't think they vet people who are potentially involved in intelligence operations as well. And I get a feeling Savile had a bigger reach than is ever going to be investigated. His connections. I mean, for people who don't understand, the previous Conservative government had been Ted Heath government in the early 70s. Thatcher had managed to get a place in his cabinet, so started her rise really to a leader then, and Heath was the same. He was surrounded by these establishment linked pedophiles. It's the Thatcher cabinet and government. It was also riddled with all sorts of accusations afterwards about the people involved, everyone from Leon Britton onwards. So I mean, it's really hard to understand what was happening there. But I think there was, and I mean, you can see by, and this is getting off subject a slight bit, but the paedophile information exchange, PI, that was around that era as well. I think that was in the background. I think there was a lot of people who believed that because gay rights was achieved in about 1969, I think it was, or around there, where it was suddenly not illegal. Buggery wasn't a crime, as they decided to do, and I think that even though that, of course, they're not related, I believe that a lot of paedophiles thought, well, if they can have their way, why can't we have our way? And many of them were already in positions of power. Many of them were in power, were very sympathetic to pedophilia because they had friends who were into the young form and stuff like this. You know, it's a very elite thing. One investigation I did recently on the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab and his mentors came across Herman Kahn, and Herman Kahn, who was classed as a real Dr. Strangelove, would say in about, I think about 76, 77, he would say in an interview that the working class don't want to tell their children anything about sex. They don't want, they don't want their kids to be taught anything in school. They don't want them to know anything. Wait till they get old enough to understand and then explain to them. Where the elites want to show their children how to have sex, want to encourage them, and want to teach them personally. That sort of is something that within the 70s, I think, was really present, and before was really present.
Yeah.
That the ownership of elites and establishment-linked people didn't only end in the political sense or power sense. It also was at home. It was at home where they believed they had that same power and right over their own children, over the children that are around them, and most importantly, or most sinister of all, children of the working class and people that they ruled over. So I think there was an element where around that time we see the infiltration of cabinets, of the British cabinet, and same over in America. I mean, God, some of the scandals that would happen over that period and onward, that is just unbelievable. It's sickening, and Savile was definitely part, and there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and Thatcher is right there, encouraging all of this. So she's not a very nice lady anyway. But this is about to turn her.
What surprises me, Johnny, is that even to this day, I mean, Savile's come and gone now, and we know all about his relationship with Thatcher. But even to this day, some people still admire Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
I can't see where that's coming from. And for example, the main historian for the Falklands conflict is Sir Lawrence Freedman, and he appears to still have a lot of high regard for Mrs. Thatcher. I don't know if it's just because she successfully won that war, but you can't just do that in isolation. You've got to look at everything else, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And I'll ask awkward questions on Twitter of people like that. And there are 3 historians now who've blocked me on Twitter, because I'm asking all for, as far as they're concerned, what are the wrong questions, I'm asking stuff about the Belgrano and, controversial things. And I think we should keep asking as well. Yeah. We shouldn't just settle for the settled version of events,
The settled versions of events, in my opinion, seem to come from, and I think it probably from evidence, seem to come from people who had a dog in the fight, who were in the eye of the storm, who could not see the wood from the trees anyway, because they were paid not to at the time. And so it would make a mockery of their whole life, of all of the beliefs that they've held over that period of time. So it's really hard for these guys to ever accept what the truth is. The truth hurts.
They won't accept that they are. If you accuse them of bias, they believe they're not being biased. Totally. How can I be biased? But they so obviously are. They can't step back from that at all. They're so, like you say, in the eye of the storm. They can't step.
Well, it's really amazing how some of the most educated people in because with my generation, they removed things like Roman history, Greek philosophy, stuff like that. They removed it from the curriculum in Britain. They didn't want you learning about things like Marcus Aurelius and how he would spend. He had techniques of thinking. So at the end of the day, he would spend the night thinking about, from a bird's eye perspective, his whole day, and how he acted with people, and how he moved around, and what he said and what he did, and it would give him a different idea of how to act in the future and how to treat people. Those lessons were taken out for a reason, yet these elites and the establishment still had that teaching, and still had that, and they take away from our educational system to make us emergent service workers, as they call us now. People who will work for them and work for the state and not question and not come across any information. And it works quite well. There's a load of people I meet. Especially when I was, it's not. I've been over here about 2 weeks now, so it's my experience of Britain is very fresh, and people are still in this haze where they don't want to ask the big questions. They're so scared of asking it, so they just avoid it, and they say, "Oh no, I don't want to bother with that. I don't want to think about that. Or there's nothing I can do anyway," and all of these stereotypical sentences. So let's get back to this. How did it unfold then? What happened that when the ships got down to the Falkland Islands?
Well,
for people who don't know the events.
Yes. The peace proposals, there were quite a lot of them. None of them worked. And then there was a very important one that sort of came to fruition at the end of April. Right at the end of April, this was a Peruvian one, and it came from President Billund. And it was it was a 7-point plan, and he gave it. It was worked out with Alexander Haig as well, and President Billund gave it to Charles Wallace, who was the British ambassador in Peru. And Charles Wallace, on the 1st of May, allegedly, sent this by telegram to London. Now, very importantly, on the 2nd of May, the Belgrano was sunk, I think at about 5 o'clock in the evening, UK time. Now, Mrs. Thatcher later stated that she didn't get the telegram until after the attack, which people worked out was 17 hours later. So when I first
how telegrams work.
I was a radio operator, and even back then in 1982, I knew that a telegram arrives within seconds, not 17 hours. So nobody has ever explained that situation for me, ever. Lawrence Friedman, I asked him about it on Twitter before he blocked me, and he couldn't explain it. He said something about HMS Conqueror's communications had gone down. I'm thinking, what? A nuclear submarine's communications has gone down. What's that got to do with a telegram being sent by an ambassador in Peru to CNC fleet in London? I mean, that's nothing to do with it,
And also a nuclear submarine with one form of communication that can go down and have no backup communication seems pretty nuts. That seems like the thing you don't want to happen with a nuclear submarine.
Yeah. I think they've got to come near to the surface to receive a very low frequency signal, to get in touch, and that's obviously brings its own problems when they come to the surface. They can be spotted. So anyway, but coming back to that telegram, as part of my research for the book, I went to the National Archive in the UK and did a little look around for the telegram, and I couldn't find it. And then I discovered that all incoming telegrams from the South American continent sent to London have been embargoed for 40 years, like we were saying, until 2052. Now, I think that is one of them. That one about the Belgrano, or the one about the Peruvian peace proposals, that will figure there. And we were talking about President Pinochet as well before. I think whatever was coming out of the Chilean embassy will also be because there'll be probably some very sensitive stuff going on there as well.
Yeah, when you say sensitive, you mean illegal, possibly just illicit, but mainly illegal.
But that will make people question the legacy of Mrs. Thatcher, I think.
Yeah.
Which they will be eager to protect after the Savile thing. They want to keep it as high as possible, but it's got to be questioned. We can't question it if we can't see what's going on.
Thatcher's legacy is inextricably linked with the Tory party and the future of the Tory party. So I think everybody knows.
A lot of them have stopped talking about her since Savile. They don't anymore. Just the odd idiot,
Yeah. I and a couple of radio show presenters. Say that, I'm not going to even mention their names. And then so for the people, the sinking of the Belgrano, that's really a big thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's huge, yeah. And that was on the 2nd of May, like I say. Do you want me to go into some more detail on that?
Yeah, go into a bit of detail, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the justification that we have now for the sinking of the Belgrano came in 1992, so it came after 10 years. It came from Sandy Woodward, who, like I say, was the man in charge of Operation Corporate. And he said there was a pincer movement against the task force. So if you can imagine this pincer, the sort of northern claw of the pincer, that was a Argentinian aircraft carrier called the 25 de Mayo. That was in the north. That was about 150 miles away or 200 miles away from the task force. The southern claw of the pincer was the Belgrano, which was about 350 miles away from the task force. So they're quite a distance away, both of them, when the Belgrano was sunk on the 2nd of May. But very importantly, we're told about the 25 de Mayo and how its aircraft were a threat to the task force. And on the surface of it, it does look like a threat because those aircraft, they have a battle radius. They were Skyhawks. They had 6 Skyhawks, and they were bombers. And they had a battle radius of 700 miles, so they could fly off 350, drop the bombs, come back 350, and land safely on the aircraft carrier. So on the surface of it, it looks like that is a threat to us. And the Belgrano, that was armed with, I think it was 12 or 15 6-inch guns, huge guns, and 10 5-inch guns. And it was armed like that because it was built for the Second World War, for the sort of battles that they had then, ship against ship. They would tear each other apart with that type of those kind of arms. The problem being the Belgrano would have had to reduce its distance from the task force by 336 miles to bring us within range of its guns. And if it had done that, it could have really caused a lot of damage. But in my opinion, it could never have done that. It would never have been given the chance to do that. I mean, it wasn't given the chance because it got sunk when it was 350 miles away. It's my position that it wasn't a threat then when it was sunk. Sandy Woodward took 10 years to tell us that it was a threat. It took him that long to get his ducks in a row and tell us that there was this threat. And everyone believes that. Not everyone, but most people believe that. And the media, they all believe that now, that was the threat. But it wasn't. And going back to the aircraft carrier, on the 1st of May, if I'd have gone up top and I'd look at the sea, it was just like a big blue billiard table. It was absolutely flat. Okay, it was a 0 wind speed on the Beaufort scale. And the problem with that is an aircraft carrier needs a headwind to sail into to allow its aircraft to take off because they need the uplift under the wings.
Yeah, of course.
Now each Skyhawk aircraft was laden with 4 500-pound bombs. So every aircraft had an extra 2,000 pound in weight to carry, and it had to be because it had to go and bomb the task force. He didn't even give the orders for them those aircraft to take off when he was within range, because he knew they'd just go up the ramp and into the sea. He'd
Yeah.
never take off in those conditions. And as far as I'm concerned, Vice Admiral Woodward knew that. Rear Admiral Woodward, sorry, knew that. He must have known that. He knows the capabilities of the enemy, and he will have known that they couldn't take off. Whereas we could take off. We had Harriers, which were vertical takeoff and horizontal
Quite
takeoff.
amazing inventions. Yeah.
When you research these things, you discover that it's not quite what they're telling us. The official history is not quite right on this. I think Admiral Woodward made a mistake there in his assessment of that threat.
Yeah. Do you think it was a mistake?
I really don't know. It's speculation again, isn't it? I don't think it was a mistake. You mean the sinking of the Belgrano a mistake? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't think we could see the, but just his decisions basically.
Oh right, okay.
His calculations of the threat.
It's just confusing to me the way he tried to get the rules of engagement changed so that he could sink it, and then he, as far as I can see, built up this idea that there was a threat, and then he didn't tell us what the threat was until 10 years later. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, it didn't add up for me. I remember I discussed this to you in a podcast that will never be heard. I did say that it was one of the first times my dad had his name in print, was sending something into a newspaper asking a question about the sinking of the Belgrano, because lots of people had some serious, they couldn't understand what had actually happened, and obviously when answers don't come back that make any sense, then the questions keep going on.
And we were saying it was sailing away. Why did we sink it? Because it was sailing away. It was outside the zone. I don't think that's as important as the other aspects. The fact that it would have taken a long time. It could have turned round at any point. That I agree with that. It could have, but it had been sailing westwards towards Argentina for 14 hours. And it didn't look like it was going to change course.
Yeah. It wasn't a threat. I mean, by the looks of what we know, by what we know. So what happens next? What did the sinking of the Belgrano lead to, really?
On our ship, we knew that once that ship had been sunk and 300 plus sailors had been killed, we knew that there was no going back. It was going to be a war, come what may. And you said earlier about, did you crap yourself? Or this was the point.
yeah, right. This was prime crapping opportunity.
Yeah, there were kids on our ship. There was one kid, he was only 16. Honestly, he was 16 and a half. He come out of school, done his basic training, and his first posting was to HMS Yarmouth. And for God's sake, he thought he was going on that deployment to the Far East. Whoa, look at me, Mum. And he ends up going to a war. He couldn't even drink beer. He couldn't even buy beer at that age.
Oh my God, there should definitely be exemptions for that when you're at war. Oh my Lord. So then you found yourself
fearful a lot of the time. I can see why.
You're on your way to war, and then it was war. So what was your experiences of that? What was that? I mean, for people who don't know, how long did this last?
74 days altogether. It started on the 2nd of April. That was the invasion. And it finished on the 14th of June. 74 days in total. I kept a diary while I was down there. There were moments when things were quite quiet and you got time to write, So I kept this diary. Every day I was writing down what was going on, and in this book, that's the sort of the timeline of the book is the diary. As you read the book, you read the diary, sort of thing. So, but the morale of the fellas on our ship was up and down all the time. It was up when we thought things were going okay, and then the ship got sunk, and then it was down again. It was like a roller coaster. It really was.
Yeah, and it's not something you expected. I
The,
mean,
the very next thing that happened after the Belgrano was sunk was the Sheffield was hit by an exocet.
yeah.
We were only a mile away from that, so we went to help, and we were firefighting and everything, and it was just the heat was just too intense, and we had to pull away. And we actually picked at that point. We detected a submarine, and to this day we don't know. We don't think it was an Argentine submarine. We think it could have been a Russian submarine. And we picked up torpedoes that were fired at us as well. All this has been poo-pooed by the MOD, because the MOD don't believe that the Argentinians could ever have mounted a coordinated exocet and submarine attack against attack us. So they've always said, no way was that submarine. You dreamt that, whatever. But I'll tell you what, our flight commander, who was the pilot of our Wasp helicopter, he went up while the Sheffield was there on fire, and he saw the submarine. He actually saw it, and he came straight back to tell the captain, you know. So we know there was a submarine there. But anyway, I'm going off the subject a little bit. But our morale was down there, you know, when the Sheffield was hit, and we took the captain off, Captain Salt, and I went up to the bridge and I saw him slumped in a chair, head bowed, and I've never seen a man look so crestfallen, you know.
Yeah. He just lost one of the Queen's ships.
Yeah.
And that meant something to those guys for sure. That meant something to those guys, yeah. So what happened next then? What happened next, Paul? This is I mean, I can't even imagine, because like you said, like we were saying, this isn't it wasn't usual for the Army or Navy or the Air Force to end up in a conflict at this point, was it?
No, not at all. I mean, the Army has had its conflicts, Northern Ireland, that sort of thing, and others since Second World War. But the Navy, all we'd had was the Cod War in the 1970s, but it was nothing like Second World War. This was more like Second World War, you know, planes coming in and bombing us, and a naval threat as well, which never materialised, but it was sort of there, you know. But sorry, I lost me thread a little bit there.
No, just wondering what the experience did for you.
Yeah.
I mean, how did it end up? How did the Falklands end for the people who are, like I say, Americans and have no knowledge of all of this British nonsense?
Yeah, well, the events started happening one after the other. Then we had the day of the landings. The troops were landed, and then on that day when the troops were landed was a big day, I suppose, because there were the amount of planes that came over from the mainland. It just kept coming and coming, and the bombs kept coming. And HMS Ardent got hit, and once again we were very close to HMS Ardent. It was bombed 17 times. The back end, the rear of the stern of the ship was just blown apart. And I was off watch then, and I went up top to help out, and I could see the thing, and just flames and smoke billowing out of the back end. And there were two guys who were actually stuck on the back end with life jackets on, and there's no way they could go forward where all the other guys were. But the other guys were relatively safe, and they were getting off onto our ship. We were right next to them, you know. But they got these two guys on the back end. They only had life jackets on. They didn't have survival suits on. So if they went into that sea, they had about 2 minutes before they'd be, you know, dead. And I watched a pair of them jump into the sea and just float off. And then over my shoulder came a Wessex helicopter from HMS Broadsword. It had seen this happening, and it winched them both up.
Did they survive?
I only found out yesterday. I watched a video on YouTube. A guy, Commander Entiknap, his name was. He was one of those guys who jumped into the sea, and from what he was, obviously he survived, yeah. And his mate, I assume, survived as well, because I was watching this video and he mentioned the other fella's name. He didn't say that he died, so I assume they both survived. And I only found that out yesterday watching this video, you know.
That's
like I say, it was one after the other. It was the Sigala had, you know, that was the biggest loss of life for us in one go. That was bombed, and then we had Goose Green, and we had Colonel H. Jones dying. You know, all these events going on. And at the end of the war, or towards the end of the war, Reagan actually came in and said, "Let's have a peaceful resolution to this." This is obviously before the surrender. "Let's have a peaceful resolution, Mrs. Thatcher." And she just sent him on his way. "No, we're going to drive on. I'm going to push them out." So lots of people died after that, you know, on both sides after that, and we got victory, of course, in the end. But I think Ronald Reagan, he had loyalties to South American countries and to the British, so he was a bit torn between the two, sort of thing. He was trying.
They had their fingers in so many Latin American pies and South American pies.
Yeah, you'll know Operation Condor, which in Argentina was called the Dirty War, and tens of thousands of people went missing. Yeah. Obviously, they're dead. They were tortured. They were even thrown out of helicopters into the sea and stuff like that going on. You know, and this was all because of Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, who started it off. You know, back in the 70s.
Truly, two men who cause massive amount of pain for a lot of people. Kissinger especially, and
Kissinger's still on the loose now, and he's
I know.
That's people's respect, and I just don't know how. I don't know how. He's a war criminal.
I think it's because if you nod your cap to Kissinger, you may get a position in the Council on Foreign Relations. I think that's kind of the way it is that you have to bow down to the old gods if the new gods are gonna lift you up, you know. And also, I mean, you look at Kissinger. I think it was the Argentinian World Cup, wasn't it? The final, he came along, went downstairs in the tunnels with the president, and then suddenly they threw the match. The other side threw the match.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really strange one. It's Kissinger just turns up at the World Cup final or the semi-finals. I think it's the World Cup finals, and basically they go into the locker room. Something weird happens, and then the side throws the match, and Argentinians go away, I think, as the victors. It's a very strange affair. Everything he was involved in is dirty, even including wars. You know, everything. Very interesting, man. Very interesting period of history. So eventually, it came to an end.
Yeah.
All of this unnecessary death and unnecessary issue led to the Falklands being back under British rule. And then, do you know if there was any changes in the policies towards the Falklands about them being able to come back to or go to Britain? And did they change any of those policies?
Yeah, she did. Mrs. Thatcher changed the British Nationality Act that she'd imposed before the invasion. She changed it back so that they were British citizens. They got full protection. The protections that had been stripped away before were returned. Yeah. And it was a popular move, and it got her voted back in. You know,
it's terrible that she was the one who made it in the first place.
I might sound like a cynic when I say that, but when people accuse me of being cynical, I say I'm passively cynical. My cynicism is hopefully will educate people, whereas if you're an active cynic, it causes destruction and harm. And people like Tony Blair, they're actively cynical, you know.
Yeah, well, God, let's not get onto Tony Blair now, or we'll be another hour, and I got to go and pick up the kid. Listen, tell us about what led you then. I mean, you self-published this book?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I don't think any of the main publishers would take this on because it's too controversial. You know, there's too many truths in it that would not see the light of day through a main publisher, you know. So saying that, I've managed to get it into one of the local bookshops on Wirral, you know.
Yeah, that's good.
But it is on Amazon, you know, you can get it there. And I counted, there's about 33 different outlets where you can buy this book, yeah.
That's good. That's good. Well, it's a good sign. It should be thousands, though, shouldn't it? And it should be that everybody has the right to make up their own mind about a subject, especially something that's been so heavily researched by somebody. So it's called Return to Bomb Alley, 1982, the Falklands Deception. And the best place to buy it is your own site, yeah.
Yeah, you can go to my website and buy it there, and you can pay via PayPal, and you'll get a signed copy, you know. But it's probably easier to go to eBay. I've just started selling it on eBay, and you get a signed copy, and it'll cost you $9.99, and it's the same price as an unsigned copy. So but you're probably better going to eBay and buying it there, or you can buy it on Amazon. You can get it as an ebook or as a printed book on Amazon.
And this isn't going to be your only soiree into being a writer. You're planning on doing another book afterwards, I believe, but a little bit different.
I've been writing over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and it's going to be science fiction related, so it's totally different to this, you know.
No, this is pretty much like science fiction when you actually look at what the official story is meant to be, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
the truth looks weird.
Some science fiction from the past is now coming true, as you can probably see. I'm a big Philip K. Dick fan, and I think some of the stuff he wrote about is the past. You know, in the same way that George Orwell, his fiction eventually turned to fact.
Well, I've said this a few times. His fiction is what his mates at the time were talking about, what they were planning on. So I mean, this is what you get. Same with the Huxleys as well, and other people. There's grand conspiracies are invented a long time before they're enacted, and they all talk about them, and everybody writes them down. And then when they come to pass, they look like fiction because that's with the flavor they've been given already. Like you say about technology being 10 years ahead. Well, you know, when it comes down to the stories of the future are written in the past, and they inspire, don't they? They inspire. Paul, it has been wonderful to speak with you, and I look forward to getting this out. I desperately, I will want you to come back on this show again to talk about other things.
More I can talk about, Johnny. I was a whistleblower once at Wirral Council, and since then my eyes were sort of opened to what's going on in the world, you know. And ever since then, I've been helping people who get bullied in the workplace. So I've been, you know, I want to get involved and do as much as I can to fix the world, sort of thing.
Good on you. I feel just the same. I feel bullied in the workplace. I do. I mean, I feel even however much experience I've got and however much I'm able to fight my corner, I still have loads of experience of all of these different organizations trying to pick me apart or pick bits of me off, whether it be energy companies lying about bills, or whether it be anyone you complain about with real actual concern turning it round on you and trying to make you look like, you know, I've had it all throughout my life. I've had it all. I've seen other people have it as well, and I think that
troublemaker straight away. When I blew the whistle at Wirral Council, I was just a troublemaker. That's the way they saw it.
Well, you gotta live by that. It's a credo, is an ethos. Is you gotta go forward as a troublemaker. If that's what they make you, then that's what we gotta do, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Hey, listen, thanks for coming on, and thanks for coming on a second time, because like I said, the first one will never see the light of day because the audio on my end was so bad, and I apologize profusely for that. Really appreciate this, and Paul, anything else you want to say to people before we go?
That's it, I think, Johnny. It's been great.
Yeah, awesome. We'll speak soon. Have a nice one.
See ya.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed